Hello, 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 and welcome to Mrs. Land's weekly book talk podcast. This is Mrs. Land, and it is February 28th, 2022. Hello again, and welcome back to Mrs. Land's weekly book talk podcast. If you've listened with us before, welcome back. We're so glad to have you listening again. If this is your first time listening with us, then welcome. We're so glad to have you. So, because it is the last day of Black History Month, I picked a book this week that I think is a great way to end this month. This month we've been talking about all different kinds of famous African American figures that we can look up to in history. And I thought a perfect way to recognize African American contributions to history, as well as focus on women in history, would be to look at the story of Wilma Rudolph. Before Wilma Rudolph was 5 years old, polio had paralyzed her left leg. Everyone said she would never walk again, but Wilma refused to believe it. She became the first American woman to earn 3 gold medals in a single Olympiad in 1960. So during the 1960s, the civil rights movement was going on. So it was very difficult for an African American person to make it to the Olympics in general, especially an African American woman. So to go along with all of this information that I'm talking about, the book that we're going to be discussing today is called Wilma Unlimited, and it is by Kathleen Cole. Last week in our podcast, I listed the Amazon link to this book, so if you guys have come from that podcast, you should already have your hands on a copy of this book. So to jump right into the book, I just wanted to share some interesting aspects of Wilma's life that I thought were worth sharing. As you guys know, through these podcasts, I don't directly read the book to you guys. So if you're listening right now, you probably should have already read the book. If you haven't read the book, that's perfectly okay. Right now would be a great time for you guys to just stop and take a little bit and read the book. If you've already read the book, then this would be a great time to keep listening because I'm going to share some things about Wilma that I thought were really cool. To talk a little bit about myself, I am a native of Tennessee, and most of my classmates that are listening to this podcast are too. I thought it was really cool that Wilma Rudolph was actually from Clarksville, Tennessee, which actually isn't too far from where I live right now. So it's really cool to think about how close Wilma Rudolph and I lived to each other, and I never even knew that. Wilma also had 19 older brothers and sisters. 19. I have one younger sister, and that was already a lot for me to deal with as a child. But 19, I could not imagine the games of hide and seek that they played in their house. Wilma was also known as the energetic, lively child around the neighborhood. In the book, it talks about most of her neighbors thinking that she was such an energetic and friendly, up-spirited child. It's so sad to think about all of these things being taken away from Wilma so quickly. When Wilma was just 5 years old, she was diagnosed with polio. Polio was a very bad disease that children got when they were Wilma's age. In Wilma's case, it messed her leg up very badly and she was unable to walk. The doctors told Wilma that she would never be able to walk again. Where Wilma grew up in the South, only one doctor in her area would even treat African Americans. So every single week, Wilma and her mother would have to travel by bus to this doctor that was over hours away to see if Wilma would be able to walk again. Even though the doctors and everyone around Wilma were telling her that she would probably never walk again, she didn't believe it. She knew in her heart that she had to walk. She sat on the sidelines and watched all of her classmates play, but she could never play with them. She knew that she had to be like them one day, and that's all she could ever think about. Wilma would practice walking every single day. She would also go to physical therapy with her doctor once a week with her mother, and she would practice different types of walking techniques. With practice and practice and practice, Wilma finally thought she would be able to take her brace off and walk. She decided to do so at church on one Sunday morning. She walked down the aisles of church. Everyone in the whole building was staring at her, and she walked to the front and took a seat. When Wilma was 12 years old, she finally put her brace in a box and sent it back to the doctor. She was able to walk completely on her own without the brace. Because Wilma had sat on the sidelines for so many years, she knew how to play all the sports that everyone had been playing. And she was an amazing basketball player. She took her team all the way to the state championships. While she was at the state championships, a college recruiter for a track and field team was there. A college recruiter is someone that comes to sports events and looks for very talented high school athletes to be on their college teams. So this man was very, very impressed by the way that Wilma ran, and he offered her a spot on his team. And she said yes. The book goes on to talk about Wilma's career in college, and then eventually Wilma is invited to participate in the 1960s Olympics. And in the 1960s Olympics, Wilma does something that the world has never seen before. She wins 3 races in a row and earns 3 gold medals in the Olympics. And this is such a significant event because this is in the height of the civil rights movement. There's a lot of tension between different races in America. And I think that Wilma going out into the Olympics during the height of all of this tension and showing that an African American is talented and worthy of being in the public eye in a positive way was such a positive and memorable influence that changed the way that people viewed African Americans. I also really, really love all of the beautiful illustrations in this book that are done by David Diaz. If you have a copy of this book in your hands, just take a minute and really soak in all of these beautiful images. I think this book also gives off a very positive influence and message to young people that even though you may be going through something that is really difficult and really hard, that's never going to stop you from pursuing your dreams if you believe in yourself. And Wilma Rudolph is a perfect example of that. Wilma was diagnosed with a disease at a very young age, and people told her that she couldn't do something, but she knew in her heart that she could do it. And with practice and faith in herself, she was able to overcome these obstacles and prove to be one of the fastest women in the world. And that's such a cool thing. But yeah, guys, I really enjoyed reading this book and looking through all the wonderful illustrations, and I hope you guys did too. I hope you guys will leave some comments and tell me some other books that you guys find interesting and what you think about this book and this podcast. And I hope to see you guys back next week when we read Mango, Abuela and Me by Meg Medina and Angela Dominguez. A wonderfully tender story about a bright young girl and her abuela who's come to stay with her and her parents in the city. But there's just one problem. Mia doesn't really know Spanish and Abuela doesn't really know English. So what can they do? Start by bonding over learning each other's mother tongues while cooking, of course. Add a chatty parrot to this team of pupils and you get an exceptional picture book with a warm message. Love truly knows no language barrier. And I will put a link in the description of this podcast for a purchase, rent, or download PDF of this book so you guys will be prepared for next week. I hope you guys have an amazing day. This is Miss Land's weekly book talk podcast.